Good morning. Dr. Robert Lesslie was an ER doctor in Rock Hill, South Carolina. It was a town of about 60,000. They had a large hospital. It was General Hospital. He worked there for more than 30 years. And he wrote a book about his experiences working in the ER entitled Miracles in the ER. And he shared some wonderful stories. One of them took place a number of years ago now. It was on a 4th of July. And it was so hot and sultry. And there were some people downtown in a bar who'd been drinking and way too much. This was really a dive of a place. And a fight broke out. And I mean, it just seemed to grow. And soon there were stabbings and shootings. The police were called in to try to disperse it. But what happened was it kind of rolled out of the bar and then into an alley. And from an alley it spread to a park. And more people got involved. Literally, a riot was beginning in the city. All the police were called in to try to quell this, but it was kind of like whack-a-mole. You'd put one down and another one would pop up, and put it down and another one would pop up. And so these fights just started going on, and it really was out of control. Well, the people started coming into the ER. There were stabbings, there were shootings, there was a lot of serious things, and people who needed surgery and people who needed to get stabilized. But then other people started showing up at the ER. They weren't quite so serious. Oh, they just had a small stabbing, or they'd been hit with a beer bottle and they needed stitches. And so the waiting room started filling up. And what happened was you had the two sides in the waiting room as it was filling up. And now they got more and more angry there, and soon it was getting out of control. Soon chairs were flying in the waiting room. Well, Dr. Lesslie is trying to take care of people and get this one man stabilized. A nurse comes running in and says, "We need somebody to do something." And things are out of control in the waiting room. Well, they had their night watchman. It was a Mr. Wright. He was about 70 years old. He stood about 5'8". He was as thin and as a corn stalk. But Robert turned to him and said, "I need you to go out there and get this under control." Mr. Wright had been listening, and he said, "All right." He walked down through the doors at the triage, and you take a right to go to the waiting room. He turned left. They never did see him the rest of the night. He wasn't going out there into that. Robert didn't know what to do. But there was a man who was a janitor. He was there. His name was Anselm. He stood about 6'2". And though he was older as well, he was solid as a rock. And Robert turned to him and he said, "Anselm, do you think you could do something? Do you think you could go out there and get this under control?" And he said, "I will try." So he walked down and he went towards the waiting room. Robert went off to be taking care of the patient, trying to get this person stabilized, processing another one. More than 20 minutes had gone by, and he'd been so focused on the patients, he'd forgotten all about the waiting room. And he suddenly thought, I sent Anselm out there into a terrible situation all by himself. I wonder if he's okay. And so Robert went into the waiting room. And when he got there, what he found was everybody was sitting all around the wall, very quietly, watching TV. He was in the middle of the room, just kind of sweeping up. And Robert went over to him and said, "Anselm, what did you do?" And Anselm whispered to him and said, "Well, I came in and I started sizing everybody up. I was trying to figure out who was causing the problem. Who was the leader here? I finally decided it was him." They looked over and it was a big, burly guy. And so I went over to him. I went over to him and got right up in his face, and I just stood there. And we just looked at each other with clenched jaws in silence for a while. Finally, I said, "I know your mama." He looked at me for a couple moments, and he went over and he sat down. And Robert said, "You're kidding me. You actually know his mama?" Anselm said, "Well, maybe not really." But he didn't know that. He didn't know that, and I could have known his mama, but it really didn't matter. But it made him think about his mama and what she would expect of him. and he sat down. You know, that's the reason we're doing a daily devotional every day during this Christmas season, so we can stop and remember, what does Christ really expect out of us? And it's why this week you and I are lighting the candle of love, so that every morning we can stop and think, how does Christ ask us to be loving one another? And you and I know the answer. Love your neighbor, no exception. Go out and make it a blessed day.